Downsizing stars Matt Damon in another movie about shrinking people, and no, it is not Honey, I Shrunk My Coworkers or anything like that. It is quite simply put a movie about people who shrink because they want to save the environment, you know? Overpopulation, wasting resources, things of the nature. And that's basically about it. There's no real plot per se. There's things that happen, but that's about it. A lot of people have been complaining that they believed this movie was going to be a comedic film and they were disappointed because it was a bit melodramatic. And while I do see that, and I will take that into consideration in my scoring, it's not the main thing that disappointed me. It was that when I was watching, I could almost hear the writers talking in the writer's room saying, "Hey, I got an idea. We'll make another movie about shrinking people. It's going to be great." And they're like, "Yeah, we haven't had one of those in a while. That's a great idea. So we'll get them to shrink." Yes. And then what? And then their ideas fall flat. Like, they don't know what to do once they shrink the people. It's like they had their best idea as the concept of shrinking people, and then they had nothing to follow through with. Once the main character, played by Matt Damon, shrinks, there's really nothing to follow that, because all it does is it just really just follows around his life in general. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. First up is the people category. This goes over the acting, characters, casting, importance, and chemistry, all of which gets only half points. Nothing was spectacular, nothing stood out. The acting was fine. There was no real super range from anybody. The characters are also fine, none of which you're really going to remember, except for the Asian girl. She's great. She's very good. Casting-wise, I don't think I care too much about anybody in the roles. Anybody could have been recast other than the Asian girl. Once again, she was probably the best part of the movie. Importance-wise, like I said, the movie doesn't really do anything past the point of shrinking. Chemistry-wise, the chemistry is pretty good between Matt Damon and the Asian girl. Nobody else really has the greatest chemistry. It's just basically typical stuff. Boring, typical stuff. That gets half points. 5 out of 10 possible stars for people. Next up, we look at the writing category, which goes over the dialogue, the balance of the film, the story depth, the originality, and how interesting it is. The only perfect points here is with originality, because I do believe that the concept alone, I do believe, was original. Yes, we've seen shrinking people movies before, but I don't really think quite like this. It had a good idea behind it. It had promise. In the end, originality does get perfect points. The dialogue and how interesting it is gets half points. It was pretty much typical with the dialogue, nothing stands out there. With how interesting it is, that had to do with the concept, it had to do with the trailers interesting me to see it, and then it falls flat while you're watching it, so that gets half points. Balance of the film and depth of the story, those both get 0. As far as balance is considered, it's all over the place. There's no real direction that anybody's actually heading. Depth of the story, I can't really think of any certain thing in the film that feels like it's deep or meaningful, so that gets 0. 4 out of 10 possible stars for the writing category. Next up, we look at the BTS category. This goes over the visuals, directing, editing, advertisement, and the music and sound. Only one of which gets perfect points, and that would be visuals. They weren't explosive, they weren't CGI-centric. However, I think they did a pretty good job with making things practical, constantly making the people look small, even if they're in their own world, in their own space, in their own homes. So that gets full points. Everything else here gets half points. Directing was fine, nothing challenging about it that anybody else couldn't do. Editing was fine, it never really had a challenge because the directing was pretty typical, so that gets half points. The advertising was not as advertised, as we both know. A lot of people have been complaining about the advertising, and I do understand where they're coming from, so that gets half points. And the music and sound, nothing stands out, nothing I want to hear again. Half points. 6 out of 10 possible stars for the BTS category. Next up, we look at the narrative arc category, which goes over the introduction, inciting incident, obstacles, climax, and falling action, all of which gets perfect points, except for the falling action. When it comes down to falling action, I want to see 2 things. I want to see if it calms down and if it returns to a new norm that is different than how it began. So, is it different than how it began? No. It does calm down a little bit, though. So for that gets half points. Everything else gets perfect. Introduction gets you acquainted with the main characters. The inciting incident is ultimately when Matt Damon gets shrunken down. The obstacles, basically how he adapts to life as a small person. There is a decently big enough climax to consider full points there. So 9 out of 10 possible stars for the narrative arc category. Next up, we're looking at the entertainment category, which goes over how rewatchable it is, how much of a fun experience you have while watching, if you have any impulse to buy it, and any impulse to talk about it, and if it sucks the audience in. A fun experience and sucking the audience in both get half point. That really comes down to the advertisement, right? So that had a pretty good, decent concept, and that does bring people into the movie till they actually get shrunken down, and then it becomes boring for the rest of the movie. Those both get half points, everything else gets 0. I will not rewatch this again. I have no impulse to buy it or own it, and I have no impulse to talk about this with anybody else. So 2 out of 10 possible stars for the entertainment category. Next up, we have the specialty category, which goes over 5 different things that I wanted to know before I saw the movie. Firstly, it is listed off as a comedy, and a lot of people were expecting a comedy. So this is one thing that everybody kind of expected from what I understand, and they didn't get it at all. This is not a comedic movie, it's melodramatic. That would have to get 0 out of 10 possible stars. As a drama, well, yes, melodramatic is drama. So I would consider giving this full points, 10 out of 10. As a science fiction film, yes, this movie is about fictional science. So I can't help but give this full points, 10 out of 10. As a Matt Damon movie, his movies are kind of touch and go with me, but I do like him as an actor. How does he do here? Honestly, he's not the greatest here. He did okay, and that's really all I can say, so I'll give him half points and say 5 out of 10. Halfway decent. For this one, I will have to give it half points, 5 out of 10 possible stars, because of the false advertisement. They did not make the movie that they intended to make. I believe that they made a mistake somewhere. If they wanted it to be a comedy, it didn't come out that way. Like I said though, it did have some decent visuals, practically speaking. They did a good job there. I will give it half points and say 5 out of 10 possible stars for halfway decent. If we add up all those points together, we get 56 out of 100 possible stars, 56%. Guys, tell me what you thought of Downsizing in the comments down below. And if you could subscribe to me on YouTube, hit that like button and hit that bell to be notified when I come out with my next movie review. That would be great. Until then, guys, peace out.